Hi, welcome back to Interfex Live. We're here with Schmidt from Catalent and from the Advanced Dosage Form Delivery Systems development. But we're going to be talking about quality by design and how these things can be leveraged not only for a CMO but for companies in general. And I think we had spoken briefly before we got started. So, Kay, it's kind of surprising to me that people don't jump all over this thing right up front. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think it can clearly be a business differentiator, reducing long-term production costs and delivering safety and efficacy. It's a differentiator, and it should be just the way we do business.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, at Catalent, is it a business practice there as well?
As a CMO or a solution provider, we recommend it to our customers, certainly, and our clients, and we try to pull in best practices wherever possible. Ultimately, though, it's the drug product owner's responsibility of their filing strategy and their design strategy.
I got you. So do you provide any enablers? Or?
Yeah, we have a toolkit and a stage gate process. So all our project managers and core team members are trained on the tools, failure modes, effects analysis. We look at our risk reduction progress throughout the milestones, and we try to leverage it even if there's not a formal QbD assignment from the customer, but incorporating it into our scale-up and production processes.
It would just seem to me that it's intuitive, you know. Anybody that's in this business would use it. Let me ask you this then. Do people find that is a plus that they get when they come and they work for Catalent, with Catalent, that you have this backbone that they can leverage?
I think it is a plus. We've received a lot of favorable feedback about what we call our NPIX process, incorporating all the elements of QbD at each phase of the program. So when a customer signs up with us, we lay out the development plan, and we talk about how we're going to establish and meet the requirements of the QTPP, how we're going to analyze the CPPs, CMAs, CTQs, and take it from there every step of the process, reiterating and looking at the risks and the risk reductions.
So do you have a glossary that breaks down all of these acronyms? CQA, CPP, yes. CMA?
Yes.
Well, I got one for, what's RPN? What's that?
Risk probability number, and it's the accumulation of the probability of a defect happening, the detectability of that defect if and as it happens, and the severity. Multiply those all together, and big numbers are bad. Big numbers are good early in the process because you know what you have to attack and you know what you have to mitigate and reduce by understanding your design space, by changing your process if it's required, and throughout each step of the development process, really reducing those risks until the risk is mitigated or the risk is acceptable. And I think that's a key difference of QbD. It's a conscious decision of when a risk is there and how you can mitigate it and if you can accept it, as opposed to a surprise at the end of the process.
Well, let me ask you this then. I've seen many people apply it in various different ways. In other words, how does it look? I mean, so the risk analysis kind of overarches the entire development process.
Absolutely.
So, for example, how do you start to evaluate? Do you look at all of the components of a process and assign this, or walk me through the process?
There's a couple different ways. Really early on, you start with brainstorming with subject matter experts. This is the process train that we're going to use, and these are the risks that we see. And that starts with our customer and the subject matter experts at Catalent. But when you get a little further along, a tool that we've found to be very powerful is a formal FMEA in a conference room, but with a big cross-functional team, meaning everybody from operators on up to the subject matter expert who will be touching this process. And then we add in something that's been very impactful in some of our projects, which is we walk the line. We walk the process. We go out from receiving all the way through our factory to shipment. And then we look at the FMEA again with different eyes And frankly, we've seen many wins this way. First off, we identify risks that we hadn't identified earlier. And we also change the probability and severity and detectability because we see exactly how the process is going to flow. So clients really like that. They really appreciate that walkthrough. And wherever possible, we try to have the technical lead on the customer side join us in that walkthrough.
So risk is really two components. It's identification of risk and control of risk.
Right. And then at the very end, did we actually meet our objectives? Mm-hmm. And risk review is an ongoing annual product review.
Okay. One of the things is, so you say from receiving through, so what does this look like? Is it like a page in a 3-ring binder? Like this is receiving, this is weighing, this is milling, this is, how does this work?
So the FMEA typically is broke into sections and it's an Excel file at the end. But you can have, I've seen it done both ways. I've seen it done by tabs within the workbook, the Excel workbook of the FMEA, or it can be just kind of process flow top to bottom.
Okay. So, so this is part of your toolkit that you provide?
Yes.
Okay. So let me ask you this then. So customarily, do your clients come with a process and product already developed, or how does that usually work?
They come with a small scale product and process, and they're typically somewhere beyond phase 1 is where the clients that I've interacted with most. So they've done maybe very small 5-liter kind of scale batches, and we're taking it up to phase 2, 3, and hopefully commercial. And really the risks are different. When you're working on something at very small scale with a small experienced work group, that's different than the commercialization process.
Well, I would think, especially considering that you do a lot of work in advanced technology dosage forms, sustained technology dosage forms, or whatever, these things have a tendency to be kind of like added on. Yeah, that's usually not your first go-to dosage form customarily. Am I right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So let me ask you this then. Do you review? I would think if they're coming in early on, it gets back to what you and I said before. Usually people say that they don't want to do the upfront work. So does it range? Do they have a pretty good tech package for this thing? Do they have not? Or how do they do it?
It's a range, really. Some have very strong and experienced and mature tech packages and very clear requirements from their company. A large pharma company typically has a strong quality system and a strong QbD system. And one of our abilities needs to be to flex our processes to match theirs, because ultimately it'll be their product launch. But we also deal with smaller companies, people who have, a molecule and a team of 3 to 5 people maximum. And those people really like to adopt our tools and processes because it helps them fulfill the obligations of the design and be able to secure a reliable supply.
Well, I would think in that particular case, what I often tell our clients that are early on, when we teach them how to go about making sure, I always tell them it should have curb appeal. And the reason I say that is most of these guys that have an early on compound are looking to flip it. And,
Yes.
A QbD package really makes it saleable.
It makes it saleable, and it makes it explainable to potential investors. If you say, I have a great molecule and I'm ready to go, that's a different message than I have a great molecule, here's my design history, here's my risk retirement history, and here's not just the results of the batch, but here's what I designed, here's my design space, and here's where I'm living.
So let me ask you this then. So, and again, I think there's in quality by design, there's the design space, there's the knowledge inventory, and then there's the controls. So do you deal with all of those components, or which ones do the clients usually supply?
The clients come to us with at least minimal and sometimes a lot of the pieces of risk control and knowledge space and those sorts of things. But it becomes a joint effort, especially as we scale up and prepare for commercialization. And Catalent data then is used as part of the submission collected by the customer.
So what is the end result in a lot of these cases? Do these people come up with a process signature that assigns almost a parametric release from the design space, or does most people still end test, or what?
We're still in a lot of end testing. I think that's a future state that we all desire to go to. And you know, in process, certainly getting more importance than final test. Final test should really just be an obligatory someday when we're more mature. And of course, PAT along the way and process checks. That's where I think the next steps are headed.
Well, yeah, and I think PAT, at least working with a CMO, is a little tough to wrestle to the ground. But I think, well, as we were talking, something came to mind, and that is, so in a lot of cases, who does the design space? In other words, they come to you with a really great knowledge, so pretty much your focus is on that design space and the DOE requirements.
Yes. So we'll look at our equipment and our quality system processes, and we'll decide, and we'll look certainly up toward the QTPP to look at the final achievable and deliverable result. But we'll say if the attribute is X, then the design space will explore, typically for the DOE, is a mixing parameter for a simple example.
Okay.
We'll do what we consider to be failure testing at both ends, and we'll test the design space within mixing, taking it through a couple CPPs and CMAs.
Okay. Well, okay, so it's what surprises me all the time, especially, and again, I thought it was just me, but when we work with people, and I find that they never bothered to fill out a TPP. So, you know, I always say to them, how do you know where you're going?
Right.
You know?
It's the goal.
You know, so having said that, do people come up with their own TPP? Do they follow the FDA guidance? Do they use that template that FDA? I found that one the FDA supplies is overly complicated and involved. I didn't think it, you know, the ones I'm used to are 2 pages.
Yes.
So what happens there with you guys?
So our practice is when a project manager gets a new project, at initiation, they should ask the customer, what do you have for a QTPP? Because that's a signal of how far they are in the process, and it's also a guide for us of what they're trying to deliver. If there isn't one, the project manager really guides them through it. Let's start filling it out. Let's start filling out what our targets are and what our product characteristics are, so that when we're done, our justification is clear and it matches the goal.
Okay. So one of the other things that comes to mind too is, okay, customarily you do end-to-end. So in other words, you take it from early stage to commercialization, and then it leaves you, or do you usually commercialize it?
We commercialize it.
Okay, so having said that, do people now leverage what you've provided them to move into CPV and continuous process validation, or what do they do?
We haven't done that, not in my experience yet.
Okay, because that's really the other thing everybody expects you to be doing.
Right. Eventually, yes. And, you know, going for faster prior approvals once we stay within the design space and we can demonstrate it. We do have some wins already, however. Without that, our yields should be improved, our reliability should be improved, and patient safety and efficacy should really meet the target profile, which is what both the client and us are aiming for.
So when they actually make the filing, let me just be real clear. Are these QbD filings that your clients make, or a hybrid of such? Or?
A hybrid, I would say.
Yeah. Because I was going to ask you if you write the summary report, which is always a challenge.
No.
I've seen those from 300 pages to 10 pages. It's amazing what people think. All right, but let me ask you this then. In the advanced dosage form delivery systems, I would think that there's so many other things that have to be considered in the design space. All right, polymer properties, all these other things. can you rely, where does the physical chemistry come from and the polymer chemistry? Is this stuff you supply, or where does it come from?
That selection is made by the customer in large part. We might make some recommendations, or we might make some changes based on our findings on how it's working in scale-up. But typically our customer has made a lot of the physiochemical and biological profile and characterization assessment by the time they come to us.
Okay. So, and as far as, one of the things we heard today was on modularity and being able to have a hybrid system where, if market demand is big or is slow, you can either turn up the process or turn down the process. Do people still stick with the batch size paradigm, or what has been your experience there?
Our experience is the batch size is the batch size, and the batch record is the guiding document, and if we want to make a change, that's a second effort or initiative.
Okay, that's understandable. So you take it up through phase 3. I would say, and having said that, with quality by design and CPV, it's intuitive, at least to me, that you have already validated this before you file it. What has been your experience there?
Yes, we go through process validation. Typically, we do the bench scale tests, followed by the commercial scale engineering or technical batches, and then the confirmation. Some customers call them pre-validation batches. Some customers decline to do that step, and then the process validation, which can become commercial if you're successful.
And that is usually done prior to filing?
Registration stability would be the initial filing at sometimes scale, at other times less than scale, with a scale-up plan.
Okay. No, the reason I ask is I always push for people. The answer really comes back to is if you're going to have a product and you get an expedited approval, but you would have known that before. Right. But let's just say for whatever reason, and you get an approval on schedule and on time, and you get a green light, your next step should be to launch, not validate.
Yes.
So to me, that's lost opportunity.
I think it depends on the client's confidence in their process and their molecule.
Well, okay, I would certainly hope they have enough confidence when they go into validation.
Yes, it's
to
a
me,
high investment.
The validation, that's, that roll in the bleacher seats. This is, this is rah-rah. There should be no question at that point.
We're going, yes.
This is it. This is the money shot, you know what I mean? Well, it's interesting. What has been your, all right, let's just talk about, for example, so why don't we talk about risk assessment versus risk control versus risk review? Everybody that does QbD likes to talk about this. That comes from ICH 9, huh? Mm-hmm. Okay, so can you elaborate on that? Because I never get it straight.
All right.
All right.
So risk assessment is identifying the risks, evaluating the risks, and then starting to look at where we can do mitigation. But the assessment phase is pre-mitigation with subject matter experts and process knowledgeable people. What are the risks? From the risk assessment phase, you really start to develop your plan to mitigate the risks, which is the risk control phase. The risk control phase is mitigation. Sometimes it's changing the design. Sometimes it's understanding process parameters through DOEs, and not necessarily changing the design, but changing the envelope in which you're going to choose to operate. Or risk acceptance is also part of risk control. And then finally, risk review. As you've finished your design and your process validation or beyond, what failures have you seen either commercially or hopefully not in the field that makes you to take an action in the risk review phase, sending you back up to risk assessment and risk control. Having said that, I think one thing that's important with the annual product reviews is really taking that knowledge capture, as you said previously, and if it's an equipment risk, especially as a solution provider, contract manufacturer, incorporating that into future risk assessments so we don't have to learn that again and again.
Well, let me let's just, while we're on that subject, can we go back then to the RPN and what role that plays in the design space?
It plays a huge role, especially in the mitigation phase. So it's really a rewarding thing when you're working on a project plan and you started with 20 to 30 red risks and you go through your technical batch and you've done your DOEs and now you're down to a handful of red risks. But you still have a handful of red risks to address, and then you take it to the next phase of development. So as we go through the various stage gates of development, we're constantly monitoring the number of red risks, RPN red risks, what we're going to do about them, and when they will be resolved.
You know, one of the things I see people spend an awful lot of, inordinately a lot of time, is the definition of criticality. You know, I used to think it was a way, when I had worked previously, I think it was an exercise for the group to get together and waste a day. You know, let's talk about criticality. I mean, so how does that and risk evaluation and risk assessment, I mean, if everything, how's the old saying, if everything's critical, then nothing's critical, right? I mean, to me, I mean, how do you do that?
It helps to have a mature facilitator, frankly. You know, we have the training and we have the guidance in our templates, in our toolkit, but experience plays a role, and a mature facilitator can really help manage not everything becoming critical. Because one of the benefits is that it is consciousness and it is awareness that everything is not critical. So we have a number of skilled facilitators, and as do our customers. They play a role in that also.
What's the composition of the team then? Is it regulatory, quality? Who are they?
Yes. The best teams are really a cross-functional team. Maybe not for every section, but if you're doing a risk assessment and it's a highly operator-involved part of the process or equipment-involved part of the process, you want to have the operator, the group leader, the process engineer, the equipment engineer, the maintenance engineer, the customer technical lead, and the new product technical lead, all in that review. And as I said before, preferably at the equipment, at the place where the work happens, looking at the process and deciding what truly are the risks to product process, and with an emphasis on safety and efficacy. So even every person on that team doesn't have to understand every element of the QTPP, but they do have to understand the goal.
Does packaging come into this too?
Yes, absolutely. I think packaging has a key role because it's where the patient and the product meet first.
Yeah, but I've always found that people play short shrift with the packaging. Yeah, well, it's stable. Well, how do you know if it's doing what it's supposed to do? You know, how do you know the counts? How do you know? I mean, there's as many recalls for short counts or over counts, right?
Right.
So I'm always amazed at that. You know, so obviously you address that.
We spend a lot of time on.
So Catalent is fully integrated. You do your own packaging as well?
We package what we make. We don't do standalone packaging primarily.
Okay.
But if we do a tablet or an encapsulation or a blow-fill-seal product, we take it through packaging at the state that the customer desires. Sometimes it's not final packaging, sometimes it is.
Well, you talked about blow-fill-seal. I got to believe that must be a great exercise in design space.
It is.
That's like bringing it all together, I think. So what has been your experience with that? I mean, that's got to be a great approach.
It's multifaceted for sure. The dimensions are the process itself, handling the formulation thermally and mechanically and sterilely, if that's a word, and making sure that those product characteristics are well maintained. If you have an active that needs thermal management, that's going to affect your process design. So you're going to try and minimize the amount of time that it sees the molten plastic, for example. And you're going to walk through that design, again, with the eye of the physiochemical or biologic properties of the liquid formulation, all the way through packaging, especially in that case, if it's oxygen sensitive, if it's light sensitive. So it's complex and multifaceted. A blow-fill seal project sometimes will have 2 or 3 FMEAs focused on, for example, sterility or focused on packaging.
It's an interesting point that you bring it up. So just on sterility, where does that fit in? Where is that terminal? Is that inline?
Blow-fill seal is automated aseptic sterilized product, typically ophthalmic and respiratory, but we have other product groupings also.
So, and that's probably the best approach for people who are looking for pre-filled syringes for atomization of, inhalation therapy and stuff?
Respiratory therapy and eye drops.
Okay. Just for clarity, it's not for injectables.
Well, we are working, and we'll see some literature at our booth about Advacept, which is sterile injectable blow-fill seal. And it can be terminally sterilized, or if the product is not capable, we are automated aseptic sterile product.
Okay. I didn't mean to get off the topic, but that's one of the things.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. Let's talk about critical process parameters and critical quality attributes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Gets back to the old criticality. Let me ask you something. Do you think we make too much as an industry about QAs, CQAs, PPA? You know what I'm saying? What do you think?
I think we need the right ones. I wouldn't say there's too many or too few. It's really like you were saying before, getting the right ones. The C does mean critical. And so they should tie to things that affect the patient or the efficacy of the product. Sometimes we might have a few too many, perhaps, but getting it right is the goal.
Customarily, do people make yield a critical quality attribute?
Not in my experience. It's more of a supply agreement.
I would think so.
Yes.
But you'd be surprised how many times I've seen it as a critical. They convince themselves that it's a barometer of their process.
Yeah, okay. I would say the other things really drive the yield as opposed to vice versa. Attributes should drive yield as opposed to yield driving
I agree.
attributes.
I would think if you dumped it in your shoes, you would have known that. You know?
Yes.
Well, so let's just talk about the critical. So the difference between an quality attribute and a critical quality attribute. How does somebody like Catalent handle that? What is your approach? What guidance do you give people?
All right. So large mature customers come to us with very prescriptive critical quality attributes, and they're non-negotiable, and that's fine. They understand their drug product, or maybe it's a tech transfer and they have experience that they know that these are the critical quality attributes. But for someone who's not that far along or that mature, we provide experiential guidance and also experimental guidance related to their specific drug product. I think we've all had that aha moment on a drug development where, yes, this is something that we thought was important, but really needs to be a critical quality attribute, and then it belongs on the batch record called out as such. It belongs on the prints as such.
I see. Well, let me ask. So while we're on the subject, so what is the end? In other words, in the end, what is this? The quality by design that is used. So you provide a report of something or a book, or how does this work out? So what is the end result?
The end result is a lot of small pieces. It's the batch record, which reflects the design of experiment work. It reflects the process. It reflects the anticipated cycle times. So it's predicting batch size, cycle time, hopefully yield at the end. We give the customer the FMEA so that they can have it as part of their filing, and our risk mitigation history. So this is where we started, and this is where we went through the development process. And each one of those pieces ties to part of the QTPP justification. And again, it's a building process. As you do the technical lab scale, technical and those sorts of batches, you're adding to that book or template at every step.
Where does the FMEA fit in the filing? Where does that go? What has been what's your experience there?
It depends on the customer, really.
Well, I would think so, yeah. All right. Because that's, customarily people don't file it,
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think if you had, at least if there were a serious finding, I'd want to go to that document first if there were something that happened.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a minute. I hate that word, but anyway. So, to me, one of the advantages that this always had was that the inevitable fishing expedition.
Yes.
Guy comes in for the inspection, and it's, oh my God, and now I can't find where it is, or I know I did that work, I just can't find the book.
Yep.
So, what's been your experience? I mean, obviously you guys get PAIs.
Oh, yes.
So, what happens? What's
So,
been your experience?
The PAIs, we have a project book and a project file for each one of ours, and we have a PAI checklist that we're developing jointly with quality and R&D throughout the development process. Because, frankly, sometimes when the inspectors come, you may not be yet to process validation, but there's an awareness of the filing, so they might want to do a PAI, and we don't have process validation yet, which has happened to us a couple times. But it's really, to your point, a very comfortable feeling to pull out the digital book, and the project manager has their PAI readiness checklist. They have all their FMEAs. They have their development plan that's been jointly agreed to between Catalent and our customer. And it changes from a panic to a process.
I got you. So, I guess my next question would be, so this is so no, that's not. How much of it broken down? In other words, this obviously your toolkit can be used for something to support a filing, something to support and document the development, not necessarily to make it a quality by design file.
Absolutely.
Okay, and I think that's an important piece that people seem to forget. And I find it a little, I guess get back, I'm coming around to the beginning again. What I find it annoying is people don't understand all of the benefits that this can actually do for them, all right? To me, systematic characterization of material with the implications, how much better could it be?
Yes.
So who does the raw material part? What I found is that's always significantly deficient, all right? And I shouldn't give this out, but pretty much when I go in when we go in for a crash and burn with a customer, 90% of the time we go straight to the raw materials to see if it shifted lots. And invariably it didn't, but all you gotta do is look at the trend in the specifications, and then they always tell you, well, it met spec. And I tell them, well, you live by the specs, you die by the specs.
Yes.
So how do you wrestle that one to the ground? Because ultimately it's going to screw you guys over as the manufacturer. So how does that work?
I think experientially we've seen a similar thing. If we're all living in pass-fail world and something always hovered around the midline of the process and passed but was but failed performance, that's always a tough conversation to have. You have to approach it scientifically with data and demonstrate why that change that's in spec suddenly doesn't result in a product that meets the final product, finished product specs. So we try as much as possible to do that work at the front end. But again, I think that's an area for all of us for continuous improvement, I would agree. I think the conversation we can have, and we're starting to have with customers, is you're going to pay now or you're going to pay later. If we can work on some of this during the development process, we can have assurance that there won't be batch failures. We can have assurance, worst case, that there won't be recalls. And that's the essence of QbD. Put the cost and the investment and the time at the front so that the long end of the tail, the commercialization end of the tail, really has a life cycle that's reliable and robust.
I agree. So, minimally TPP, walking in the door.
Yep.
If not, you'll walk them through it.
Yes.
Okay, that's good. And to me, I always fail to understand how anybody could not get it when it comes right down to, you know, what are the positive advantages, okay? Now, there was one other thing I wanted to touch on before we close, because we're getting down to the wire here, and that was your, what did you call the toolkit, NPIX?
NPIX, NPI
Hey,
Excellence.
Oh, all right.
Yes, our toolkit of stage gates and milestone reviews. It's supplemented with, it's a toolkit, so it's hardware, but it's also software, it's a culture. So project manager and core teams are trained on how to walk through the various, these are the things that we need to do at the milestone of project initiation. Some of the software things are we have to have the core team members listed, we have to have responsibilities known, we have to have those sorts of things. But then it quickly gets into hardware. Before we do registration stability, here's the number of things that we need to have completed from a design space knowledge, from a batch record, all those things. And the site leadership team, a cross-functional leadership team of every function, quality, regulatory, operations, environmental health and safety, and R&D, and the customer looks at the work packet and says, yes, we are confident. We are ready now to build this registration stability budget. Or we're ready to make this initial filing. Or we're ready, as the gates go through, we'll have that formal review internally at Catalent and also with the customer.
Just how many phase gates do you have?
We have 8.
8.
And 8 is post-launch review, where a lot of risk review is conducted. Did we meet our milestones on cycle time, on yield, on reliably supplied, on-time delivery, those sorts of things. Okay. The front end of the process, gates 0 through 3, are really I'll say, the front end business development process. So the real R&D work starts at gate 3, which is the development plan. So 3 through 8.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kay. We appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
Thanks, Russ.
Thank you.